Hello, Chicago, and welcome to Celebration of Chicagoland Radio Legends, Chicago Sports Podcast, and Bridges Scoreboard, your Northwest Indiana sports headquarters. Proudly present Chicagoland's greatest DJs.
Who came in?
They have been.
Am I in the wrong seat?
I think I am. They have been the wake up and work soundtracks of the lives of numerous generations and countless numbers of Chicagoans. They are true Chicago originals, true Chicago rebels, and true Chicago outlaws, true Chicago entertainers, and true Chicago Hall of Famers. It's a time when drive time radio was king in the Windy City. They sat on the thrones. They got Chicagoans through their days and nights in the most entertaining ways possible. They are three timeless Chicago radio pioneers who are still entertainers, personified with a Billboard #1 bullet. Mitch Michaels, Rick Camphor, and John Records Landecker. And friends, I'm your other guy, Brandon Trax Hyatt, joined by one of the most popular, charismatic, compelling, controversial, honest voices in the history of Chicago sports talk radio. He will be here momentarily. Once he gets here, I'll call out his name. So, hey, what impact, Mitch, Rick, and Johnny have had on your career during your broadcasting, interviewing, and style? Hold on a second. That was oops. Okay.
What?
Wow.
Take two.
Okay, take two. When did the radio gods call you and inform you were destined to be a DJ, John?
Actually, when I was in elementary school,
Wow.
I listened to my local radio stations, and there was something very compelling about it. It was also the time that rock music was starting, and I would go to the local electronics store and build what were called crystal diode radios, which had no power somehow, picked up whatever the long antenna that you strung out could pick up, and that was the beginning of that. And I've been one way or the other in it or around it ever since.
Wow, that's awesome. Before the greatness of the Loop, there was another station that dominated the airways in Chicago. Can you tell us about the heyday of the big 89 WLS?
Well, yeah. The heyday of the big 89 was exciting, fun, energizing. It was a situation where everyone at that radio station got along with each other extremely well, worked together. All of the air personalities showed up on each other's shows. We'd hang out together on the weekend. We also partied with the engineers, the promotion department, even management. And it was just a really great time. It was like it never ended. We saw each other on the weekends. It was an impossible situation for another radio station at that time to make a dent in our ratings, because there was so much more on the air than just the music and the personalities. There was this intangible element of fun and energy that you could tell from each show, because each show talked about the other shows, and then somebody from one show would show up on another show, and it was just a fabulous time. It wasn't work.
You know what? Let me just say something. There's a good friend of mine, and I think you guys know him, Tim Sabian, put a name on that, called it stationality. And we had that at a couple of places as well. But you're right. WLS was that was the monolith.
And the worst thing that happened to WLS is when the #1 competitor, WCFL, changed to Beautiful Music. And then that meant your #1 competitor was gone. So who are you competing against now, other than the feedback? You know what I mean? It's like,
Yeah. You were working in Toronto when famed Loop general manager Jimmy DeCastro came to woo you to the Loop. What was his pitch?
hey, you want to come back?
I can get you out of the country.
Really, there wasn't, he didn't have to say much. I had 2 kids that were still in Chicago, and I was flying back and forth, or they were flying back and forth every other weekend. And it seemed like a good idea at the time. So I said yes.
There you go. You tell the story in your best-selling autobiography, Records Truly is my middle name,
Yeah.
about the Loop files,
Uh-huh.
about the day you knew it was over for you at the Loop. Can you tell us that story?
Well, I think it probably actually started the day I knew it was over was probably the third day that I was there. The day that I really knew it was over, in the book, I think I use an example of the program director at the time coming in and turning my microphone off in the middle of something that I was doing on the air. But there was more to it than that. It was the wrong place at the wrong time for me. Let's just put it that way.
Okay.
Read the book. Get the Loop files. It's all in there.
Let's go. Yeah, well, we're going to get that book, and a couple of us others out there, a lot of people out there looking for that. So was there ever a more magical time in radio and a better time to be a disc jockey in America than the 70s and 80s?
Not to my knowledge.
Not to mine either.
No. Although I got to say, growing up outside of Detroit and Ann Arbor, Michigan, I listened to some guys that I thought were pretty darn good.
CKLW.
Yeah, WXYZ, Joel Sebastian, who ended up working in Chicago. But no, I think that is the heyday. Disc jockeys or on-air personalities who also happen to play music would be the 60s, 70s, maybe the early 80s.
Okay. One final question I got for you. With more legendary stations going dark each year and mom and pop stations disappearing from the dial and into the history books of Chicago radio, do you worry about the future of this rich classic American entertainment medium?
Well, I've never really heard it described like that, but
I kind of like that. Actually.
that's pretty good. As long as
Put
you
that on a business card.
it,
Yeah,
if
man.
you put it that way.
T-shirts.
What was that? What was that question again? Do I what?
Do you
Oh, there
worry
is no-
about the future of radio?
There is no future for radio.
Okay.
Seriously. I just think it's a matter of fact. Certainly radio as I know it, or you know it, the way it was run previously, those work situations don't exist anymore. In the middle of the 90s, I believe there was some legislation passed that allowed large companies to own massive amounts of radio stations. Okay, so radio stations that used to be competitors now were put together in a cluster in cities, and they would own, I don't know, 5 or 6 stations in one city, thousands of stations across the country, and that meant that they could slash the staff. So if you used to have, let's say, 6 promotion directors at 6 stations, and then all those stations were purchased and put in one cluster, you didn't need 6, you only needed 1. And one person cannot do the job of the other 5 people. So everything came down, and they wanted it that way because they were programming for the stockholder and not programming for the listener. So, in fact, just in the past couple of days around here, there have been some people axed from Alpha Media, which runs radio stations in Illinois. It's still going on to this day. And then they're replaced by something called voice tracking, which means you and I could sit here, and if we had the right equipment in front of us, we could record anything for any radio station that was connected to this ownership anywhere in the country. And it could be played back like in whatever time slot they wanted. But there would be nothing local about it, you know? I mean, if a tornado hit that town, you never know because there was no one really on the air in that city. And when I got into radio, the whole idea was that the station served the community, and that sort of vanished, I think. Maybe there's some sort of radio future, but not in the way you and I know it or knew it. Let's just put it that way.
Gotcha.
I mean, look at this. You're a podcast, right?
Yes, sir.
I mean, basically, we're all talking into microphones, and
Yeah.
it's going out, and somebody's listening to it, which is pretty much the way radio is.
But finally, some people actually get to see how handsome you are.
Well, that's not a positive. I mean, you asked me,
Another face for radio.
if there was any other positive.
Yeah, you
for
said I
radio.
fit right in. I got a face
But
for radio.
seriously,
So I was like,
how many podcasts are there? 6,000, 8 million, whatever it is.
There's a bunch.
Tons,
Yeah.
right? So people are listening to radio stations on apps and not on quote unquote radios.
right.
So I don't know what the future is, but I do believe that if you have a good product,
Yeah.
and if you have a good product and you find a way to deliver it, it will reach its audience, regardless of
Love
whether it's something that was on the air in the 20s now or in 15 years from now. If it's good, if the content's there, it will find its audience. But the trick is to find the content.
Yeah, well, one of my coaches said when I was playing college ball, he said he said hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard.
That's right.
And a lot of times you can use that hard work to get to your talent. So, but once the talent falls off and it's not working hard, that's where, somebody like me gets to move in. So, because I work my butt off, man. I have to try like extra hard. I'm like that C kid in class. You know what I mean?
Well,
They don't just come to me.
There's nothing easy about being on the air either.
Oh no.
I mean, there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes that people aren't aware of.
Yeah.
They would tune in and go, "Oh, you're on for 3 or 4 hours. How hard can that be?"
Mm.
Well, Rick can tell you, Mitch can tell you, I'm done. You can ask them.
Well, let me just say that I really learned the meaning of show prep from Mr. Landecker, who's a hero of mine, and I got hired at ABC-FM, which was on the 4th floor of the Stone Container Building, and then on the 5th floor was WLS. John worked 6 to 10, if I'm not mistaken. I worked 9 to 1 at night, so I'd get to the station 7:30, quarter to 8, kind of gather myself a little bit, and then I would go upstairs for some show prep. And yes,
Oh boy.
it was.
That's where the work hard.
Well, it was.
Came in, right?
It was really delightful to not only get to hang with John while he was on the air, but they had kind of an open bar. Tequila, and they had other intoxicants up there as well that we were, allegedly consuming. But I think
know nothing.
I think the statute of limitations has run out on that. I
don't know
hope,
what he's
but
talking about. I have no idea.
But it was, and then John sometimes would come down and join me in the studio, bring a bottle of wine down, and we'd sit and listen. See, I didn't have to talk as much as John did, so it was. We could sit back and listen to some tunes and have a glass of wine or something. It was, so I thank you for the tutorial.
Oh.
Thank you. And I've tried to continue that through my entire career. It's like,
Everybody, welcome and thank John Records Landecker once again.
Yeah.
Boogie check. Next up on deck, we have Rick the Radio Camper.
Hello.
the radio camper.
I guess so.
Yeah.
Our next guest lived, made, and captured Windy City radio history as executive producer of the John Records Landecker Show from 1993 to 2003 and was the man in the loop of Chicago's beloved station from 87 to 93. His radio producer handbook is a gospel textbook on how to produce a radio show in 65 universities across America. His acclaimed retrospect on the Loop's glory days, The Loop Files, is a must-read for any Chicago radio fan. He is also an award-winning media writer who has interviewed over 300 members of the Chicago media over the last 30 years. Today, you can enjoy his work as the co-host of the popular podcast Minutia. Am I saying that right?
Yeah.
Minutia Man
Mm.
and Free Kicks. And check out his heralded film documentary on the Kevin Matthews Ed Zeppelin band called More Please. He is Rick the Radio Camper.
Hello. Yeah.
Hey,
Radio
Rick.
truly is my middle name.
Hey, Rick. Born to be a radio man, or did you just travel a broken, sometimes static-filled road to a life in Chicago radio?
That's a good question. I think I was born to be a radio man because I always loved it from my very youngest years I can remember. I'm not in it anymore. I left the business when John and I were asked if we wanted to re-up, and we said yes, and they said no.
We need your
So,
key card.
yeah.
Thank you. That's all.
So yeah, that was about 20 years ago. 20 years ago, yeah.
And you worked for 7 years at the Loop. Can you tell us your role there as a producer?
Yes, I was the producer of Steve and Gary's show, which was on in the afternoon at that time on the Loop at AM 1000. And I also hosted a show or co-hosted a show called Ebony and Ivory, which was like a comedy show with Stan Lawrence on the weekends.
Gotcha. What was the magic that made the Loop such a beloved and iconic Chicago station? Was it you guys?
Yeah, it was us. No, it was
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Full credit.
Well, Mitch, I am sure Mitch is next, but it started with his era, the late 70s, when Steve and Gary were there and Mitch and Sky Daniels. And at that point, the Loop was such a part of Chicago that these T-shirts that we're wearing, they were everywhere. In the book, it says we sold 2 million of them in 1 year.
Wow.
In 1979.
You couldn't go anywhere without seeing them.
So that's how it started. And then there was another big Loop era that I was a part of with Stephen Gary and Kevin Matthews and Johnny B and Chet Kopic and all that. That was in the late 80s and early 90s. And that captured Chicago too, because we had so much talent on the air from morning until night. It was kind of like the old WLS days where they had huge personalities on every time period. You could just leave the radio station on and just listen all day long. And that's, I think, one of the things that people love about this book is it kind of brings them back in time to those days where they can relive those memories.
That's so cool. And, I remember vividly my mailman every day faithfully delivering the mail. And he always had his, Walkman, listen to the radio and all that too. And a buddy of mine, he had a good time working in his shop, tying flies and stuff. And I tell you what, that's one thing about radio that is so cool, man. You can get down the road, do what you got to do, and still be entertained and listen to you guys. So that's so cool. Capturing the essence, the personalities and the moments that made the Loop Chicago radio treasure, and literally interviewed anyone of significance who ever did time on the Loop. Can you give us a few of the stories you never heard of before you started writing the book?
Yeah, there's a lot of stories that I did not know. One of the stories in the book is about Sky Daniels, your old pal. The very first day that he was on the air in Chicago, somebody pulled a gun on him, walked into the studio, pulled a gun on him, and wanted to kill him.
Jeez.
Because of something Mitch said on the air and the show before that.
Yeah. I set him up. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, I had never heard that story before. And then there's another story about a guy named Wild Bill Scott. Remember him?
Yeah.
He
rode hard, put away wet.
Yes.
Yeah.
He was a character. Let's put it that way. He, at one Chicago Fest, was holding a T-shirt in the air, a Loop T-shirt, grabbed a knife out of his pocket to slice it, just to be dramatic, and sliced through the shirt right into his stomach. Yeah. So I hadn't heard that story either. Those are great stories, though.
Jeez.
That's what we call show prep.
Yeah. Right. Exactly.
Show prep
before you did it.
Stray bullets too. What's the secret to John's enduring greatness as a radio entertainer?
He is got the sharpest mind of anybody I've ever worked with. It's just like a split second thought process in his head, and he's unbelievably great on the phones. Like he used to do a bit called Boogie Check. You guys remember Boogie Check?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, where he literally just went to the phones and just talked to whoever was there, and it was like rapid fire, like 5 seconds, 8 seconds, and he had a joke for all of them. It was unbelievable. I've never seen anyone else that could do it like that.
Wow, that is so cool. It's it's special to have somebody like by your side that just makes everything so much easier and fun. You know what I mean?
Yes, and being his producer, when I would come up with ideas for the show, and we talked every night about what we were going to do the next day, and I always felt like if I came up with a good idea, he would make it great.
Wow,
because he had that kind of talent.
That's awesome. You were also the man behind the scenes of Steve and Gary for 5 years. What's your favorite story about your time with them?
That you can tell.
You can tell anything on this thing.
Boy,
it's Griffith. It's a podcast. You're good. This ain't a 4-letter network.
There's another former Steve and Gary producer out in the crowd, Roman Sachak. He was my predecessor. But I don't know if this ever happened to you, Roman, but there were days that Steve walked in and his hair was like up here, and he just had a look in his eye like this is going to be a long day. And there were some days that he couldn't even sit, and he would lie down, and I'd have to put newspaper on the floor like a puppy, and he would lie down on the ground, and I had to hold the microphone to his mouth, but he still did the show, and it was good. It was always good. But that's the one thing that I remember the most.
That's awesome. What was your most memorable brush with celebrities during those years that you had?
I got a funny Ringo Starr story. I'll tell you that.
Wow.
Joe Walsh was on our show, on Steve and Gary show, and he was touring with Ringo's All-Star Band. And Steve said to him, why don't you get Ringo on? I mean, just jokingly, because he was a Beatle, we didn't think he'd really come on. Jeez. And Joe got on the phone, got Ringo, and handed me the phone.
Wow.
Like, hello? Yeah, it was Ringo. I was talking to a Beatle, and I'm a huge Beatles fan. I was a little speechless at that moment.
Yeah.
He knows. I got another story about George Martin I can tell you later. But so Ringo gets on the air. I had a chat with him. We got him on the air. And he hears that he's in delay. He's like, are you putting me on delay right now? Yeah, I'm not going to do the Liverpool accent. Yes, we are. He said, I've done 10,000 interviews in my life. I am the most trustworthy person you could ever meet. How can you not just put me on live? If you can't trust me, you can't trust anybody. And so Steve goes, okay, you're right. I'll put you on live. And it took the delay off. And the second he figured out that he was on live, he said, yeah. My Ringo story.
Wow. I mean, he's just dropping names of Beatles. I mean, seriously, come on. You know what I mean? Like that's so cool. Just a name drop. So, ladies and gentlemen, once again, thank you, Rick, for being here and blessing us with your time.
Radio camper.
Last but not least, in November of 1968, a radio man was officially born at WHFS-FM in Bethesda, Maryland.
Bethesda.
Bethesda. Apparently, I haven't been there. Well, I did, but I took a boat. I was in the Navy, and the rest was a
Sheba
blur.
was a gal I was dating at the time.
That's where I got it
from Bethesda.
That's where I got it switched up.
There you go.
So in 1971, the Windy City lured you to a sweet siren song and never let him go. He's been on the air ever since, electrifying the dial at WGLD, WXRT, WCKG, WLS, and WXCD. His ultra entertaining autobiography retelling his more than half-century career in radio is called Doing the Cruise, Memories from a Lifetime in Radio and rock and roll. He is Mitch Michaels. Mitch, you've been told a story over the years from your early years working at the former WGLD, a rock station in Oak Park, of how you would go outside of your program director's office for smoke breaks and look at the Chicago skyline at night and say to yourself, that's where I really need to be.
Yep.
Was Mitch Michaels and the Chicago radio scene love at first sound and sight?
Well, yeah, I mean, I was, it happened because I was working at a legendary station in Cleveland, but I wasn't working there much longer. And a record promotion guy, it was a regional guy, excuse me, a guy named Lou Sicarezza, took a tape of mine that one of the engineers at WMMS gave him and brought it to Chicago and gave it to this guy named Ed Shane, who was taking over WGLD. And about a week later, I got fired at MMS. And about a month later, Ed Shane called me and said, hey, would you be interested in coming to Chicago and doing 7 to midnight? I said, well, let me think about it for a minute. Okay. And, so I was here. I got here December of 1971. And you're absolutely right. The program director's office was just out the door from the studio. And for whatever reason, he left it open, foolish as he was. And his back part of his office had another door that went out on the fire escape. And we're on the 5th floor of the Oak Park Arms Hotel, 4 floors of which were populated by septuagenarians and then some. It was very, I speak much more kindly about that now than I did 50 years ago. But, and we would go out there for I like the way you put it, a smoke break. I didn't smoke cigarettes in those days, but we also had contests, and across the parking lot was like a little parking garage, and beyond that was the Catholic high school in Oak Park. I can't think of the name. And we would frisbee albums to see if we could get them on top of the parking garage, and we got some over there. And a lot of them didn't get over there. There was a lot of broken albums and we never got any complaints about it that I ever heard. But, so yeah, it was just, and you just looked east and the whole skyline was right there. It was like, that's where I want to go.
Yeah, nothing beats Chicago skyline and all the lights and everything. And I mean, it's so cool. I did like Baltimore though, when I went through there, Maryland, like the water taxi and all that, and, and the nice roads and whatever.
They got water taxis here, don't they?
But yeah, they got all that.
Baltimore's got nothing on us.
It was actually, when I spent 4 years in the Middle East, unfortunately, it was one of my favorite port visits when I came back home. So I only had a couple of them. I thought Baltimore was pretty cool, but I also was kind of overserved too. So you were live at one of the most famous and infamous nights in Chicago radio, Disco Demolition Night, July 12th, 1979 at Comiskey Park. Tell us what that madness was like from your view in the broadcasting booth.
Well, it was an interesting night because, Steve had done a disco demolition down at a place called Point East about 3 or 4 weeks before that. He'd been blowing up the disco records, and they had a pretty good crowd down there. So Mike Veck was somebody that we had kind of a connection with, and the White Sox, the White Sox weren't very good that year, and even when they're good, they don't draw fans. But so this was an idea to put some fannies in the seats. And we promoted this thing, and the day of Disco Demolition, I believe, was a Thursday night. We had a meeting in the general manager's office, and it was Les Elias and the program director and the aforementioned Dave Logan was actually in there, myself and Jeff Schwartz. And we each wrote a number on the blackboard of how many people we thought would show up. Okay. The biggest number was like 26 or 27,000.
Okay.
Right? So it was a doubleheader, and I got to do something that I'd always wanted to do, which was I got to do a couple innings of play-by-play with Harry Carey and Jimmy Pearsall.
Wow.
And that was interesting in the sense of trying to explain to Jimmy what the hell was going on? Who the hell are these people? What the hell? I mean, the place was packed, and the crowd outside was even more outrageous. And I kept telling Jimmy, I said, Jimmy, these are sports rockers. They love sports and they love rock and roll. And they got in for 98 cents in a disco record. Okay. So between games, the whole thing came out. The thing that always blows my mind is Bill Veeck was the guy that started pyrotechnics in baseball and all of that. They had this huge cage out in right field that they put all the disco records in. And, you know, Steve did a whole thing, and then they blew up the disco records. It was like nobody put any bottom on this thing. There was a big, huge burn hole in right field. I'm thinking, wait a minute. Show prep. Did we try this before we did this? It was like, you know, and it was like, come on. And then everything went bananas. People started throwing disco records on the field. They had more than one apparently, and people jumping out of the stands and whatever else. And I remember at one point Mike Veeck came to me. I was up in one of the boxes, and he goes, "Can you get back on the PA and see if you can do something about this?" You know. So we went up there, and I'm doing what you do at a concert. Back to your seats. Back. And we had people chanting that, and it looked like they were starting to come off a little bit. And this is a true story, and don't get me wrong. Harry Carey has always been one of my favorites and a hero of mine. Harry comes up from the Barnes room. I think he'd had 3 or 4 buds. What the hell's going on up here? Holy cow!
That sounds good. That was good.
Takes the microphone away. Starts doing and the whole place went nuts, and more people was jumping on the field, and it was history from that. Yeah, they forfeited the second game, and I mean, Sparky Anderson, the Tigers manager, said, "There's no freaking way we're going to play a game here now." You know, I mean, the players were out on the field. They're dodging records while they were out there. So I don't mean John. John was on the air that night, but it was.
And the final crowd tally was.
Well, that's the crazy part. I mean, Comiskey held 42 or 43. We probably had about 45 in the building. Okay, there was another 30 or 40,000 people outside. People climbing up the walls and their friends pulling them in and stuff. It was one of the craziest things I've ever seen in my life. It was just, I mean. Just absolutely insane.
Just 1 month later, you did another huge event at Comiskey. Were the tensions high?
You know what? It was real interesting. You're talking about Day in the Park.
Yeah.
And it was actually 3.5 weeks later. It was like, and it was 5 bands on stage: Santana, Journey, Eddie Money, Thin Lizzy, and Molly Hatchet.
Wow.
Great lineup. Incredible. You know. And there was definite concern, and I remember very specifically being told, "Do not mention anything about, what back then." So, and I was the MC for the show. I go out on stage, and the place was 60,000 people, and they were on the field. Needless to say, and I said, "Hey, here we are, and this time we're allowed on the field." Oh, I got lots of grief for that. Just for don't do that. Oh, don't tell Mitch, don't do that. He'll probably do that. It's like, so it's like, But yeah, and that thing went off without a hitch. It was great. A lot of great memories from that as well.
Must be the name Mitch. My dad's name's Mitch, and you tell him not to do something, he's on it.
Yeah, no,
Can you tell us the story of the cake that helped get you fired from the Loop?
Well, okay, yeah. I knew I was on my way out. They had replaced me as program director with a guy named Max Floyd from Kansas City. Max was kind of a humorless dolt, and he was asking me to come in. No, he was telling me every week I had to come in and do air check sessions with him. I've been in the market for like 11, 12 years, and I'm going in and doing air checks from this guy from Kansas City. So it's like, huh? Well, at air check sessions, when you sit down and he's got like a tape of your show, and he's just critiquing what you're doing, how you're doing it, how you said this, what you said that, why did you say that, or it's one of those. Okay, let me get the red pen out and mark this up for you. It's like, so anyway, I knew this was, the beginning of the end. And every month they would have a birthday celebration for whoever birthday it was that month, and have a cake, and and my birthday's in March, and I was the only one in the room that was celebrating the birthday. There's probably probably 8-10 people in the room, including the president of Heftel, Tom Hoyt, who was from Texas. He was well, son, what do you think? Yeah, one of those kind of guy. Yeah, pretty good guy, but so I get there, I smell the cake and whatever. And I go, Max, you got to check this cake out. It's unbelievable. And Max bends down to snip the cake, and I just planted his face right in the cake. And Tom Hoyt looks at me and goes, son, sometimes I just don't understand what the hell you're thinking. He fired me about 6 weeks later. It was like, what are you going to do? Sometimes you just got to say, what the fuck?
You're a renowned champion for artists all across genres of music. And but here's a story that we really would like to hear on how you impacted Rod Stewart's career.
Well, that's funny. That's back in the beginning in Cleveland. Summer of 1970, I got a chance to go to Goose Lake, Michigan for a festival. Okay. And it was an amazing weekend. My first exposure with Bob Seger, Brownsville Station. And I also got a chance to see Rod Stewart in the Faces, okay, and had a chance to sit down with Ronnie Wood and Rod Stewart and talk to him for a little bit. So then and I've been a Rod Stewart fan. I love both of his solo albums at that point in time and some of the stuff that the Faces has done. The next year, 71, summertime, Rod comes through, and now he's solo touring on Every Picture Tells a Story. Great album, extraordinary. And I go to the show, I'm backstage, and he remembered me. I was really surprised. Got it waved, we talked for a minute, and they went out and did the show, came back, and I'm talking to him again, and I said, Reason to Believe is a great song. That was the single, okay? And I said, but we're getting 10-1 calls on the flip side, which was Maggie May. And he goes, jump in the limo, come back I'll buy you a drink at the bar. We went and talked for a little while, whatever. I didn't think anything else about it. He obviously got to the record company, and they flipped it over. And, and I saw him probably 4 or 5 years later. He was in town for a big record thing with Atlantic Crossing when he had just changed labels and gone to, Atlantic Records. And still didn't occur to me. Forward to 1992, probably May or June, Jay Leno had just taken over the Tonight Show, and he has Rod on, okay? And they're talking, and Rod sang something, sat down, they're fooling around for a while. Jay goes, well, you're going to sing Reason to Believe for us next, right? He says, that was the flip side of Maggie May? And Rod goes, well, actually, Maggie May was the flip side. He said, if it hadn't been for a disc jockey in Cleveland flipping it over, I'd still be digging graves.
Let's go.
I'm like,
let's go.
And I'm sitting there watching this on TV going, no, he didn't remember my name for sure. It didn't have my address because I didn't get a check, but, yeah, it was, I was just blown away. It was just, and I've still got that videotape. I've got, you can get it on YouTube. So it's
that's awesome. Can you tell us about your friendship with Johnny and the key to your chemistry?
This gentleman right here,
Johnny B.
Oh, Johnny B. I knew Johnny, but I didn't see him as much. I was gone from the Loop before he started there. Then I went back. But I was only doing weekends at that point in time. So I would see him when I'd fill in for Stroud or whatever else. He was a very, amenable guy, fun, crazy. But I don't have any real interpersonal stories that I could tell you. He's paid me well to keep those under the table. But always was just a really good guy. And one of my dear friends is a guy named Jimmy Mack, who was his producer for quite a while. And he's told me more stories about Johnny than, just some of the crazy stuff that they did, but
The producers know the real
oh
stories.
yeah, that's true. That's true. The ins and outs.
Oh man. Well, you know what? We don't want to. Is there anything that you've wanted to share?
Yeah, I could give you my account if people want to sell me some money, but I think John would speak to this as well. That we've done this for a long, long time.
Yeah.
And he's still doing it actually, but it was never real hard. I can remember going to work with next to no sleep, hungover, whatever else, and I still, you got in there and something clicked.
Yep.
And for me, the music was part of it, but just being on the air and again, you talked about the 70s and the 80s. That was when personality radio was really, was the effervescence of that was just like, you can't beat that. It just was so much fun.
Well, and you guys were like the launching pad. You were the pioneers of where it all started in media. I mean, everybody came to you. Everybody was recognized. That's where it was at. And everything points back to that, and everybody knows it. And you know it too. It like you said, you don't have to drop your name about the kid that hooked up Rod. He knows and and that's it. You know what I'm saying? So that's
still wish you had my name and address, but
yeah. Hey, if you're listening, Rod, send the check. All right, so we got a couple panel questions really quick. Anybody's, it's just up for grabs, whoever wants to answer first. What was a typical workday like for you back in the glory days of Chicago radio?
It started hours before I went on the air, and I would go into the station maybe 3:00 in the afternoon and read all the newspapers and think about things that were in the paper that could go on the air. If there were things that were applicable, I'd try to work out something that would be entertaining that would incorporate that. Once in a while, I got grandiose ideas. When Star Wars was just coming out, and it was a really big deal, Mark Hamill was going to come in for an interview in the afternoon, and Carrie Fisher was going to be on the phone with Bob Surratt was filling in the morning. And I got this idea that Bob Surratt and Carrie Fisher were kidnapped in the WGN helicopter by Darth Vader, and that if WLS wasn't turned over to him in 30 seconds, he was going to drop both of them into the traffic below.
Oh, man.
So it took all day with a production guy to time out what we thought would match this script as far as the Star Wars soundtrack. And Mark Hamill came in. Well, first of all, I came in the morning when Carrie Fisher was being interviewed by Bob. And when during a commercial break, I asked her if she'd read these lines, and she did. And so when I got there in the afternoon and Mark Hamill came in, he took a look at the script and said, yeah, let's do it. So away it went. So that was like all day. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like Bob's show was like, he was, morning drive is 6 to 10 in the morning. So I'm probably there at 7 a.m. and I'm going to go till 10 o'clock at night. But that was an abnormal day. I mean, but it's like your brain is always on, always. And you never know when some idea is going to come to you that you can use. And that's pretty much it. But if you had to isolate yourself to a certain extent and concentrate on what was going on and write down the stuff that you were going to use and then use it. That's pretty much it.
So, John got to do more topical stuff. I didn't do as much. My focus was more music stuff and whatever else. And, back in the day, you had Cream magazine, you had Rolling Stones, there was no internet. I've always said that since the internet, I am the most innovative and educated and pontificated personality on the radio because I could find anything in about 15 seconds, and it was like I said, "How the hell did we ever do this before we?" Seriously, but yeah, I mean, you had to go look for stuff, and I mean, really look. So
Yeah, because out of the news, outside of the newspaper for sources, what else? Hearsay,
Yeah,
phone calls.
right.
What did you guys? That's
Yeah,
it, right?
For music stuff, you could have the record guys would sometimes provide you with stuff and whatever else. But if you had and I didn't have a producer for a lot of the time, so I was the producer, director, voice, whatever, and hey.
Well, you also had television. We would get clips off the television. We would magazines, books. Every book that came out would come to the radio station. We'd look through them. That's how we got guests a lot of times when somebody had a book tour they were on. But like they said, before the internet, you really had to hustle. It was 24 hours a day.
Oh yeah,
basically. Yeah, I had 3 little ones when I was John's producer, and it worked out perfectly because when they were babies, I was getting up at 2:00 in the morning, and so were they. So I could take care of that, overnight feeding, and then go into the station. But
I'm looking at your wife over there. Yeah. She's nodding her head no on that, but I thought see some credibility gap here.
She doesn't even
Insider
know.
source here.
But you must admit, it was a 24-hour a day job. There was one time my middle son Johnny came up to me while I was preparing the next day's show, sat on my lap, put his face right into my face and said, "Dad, we need to play." Like, okay, I think I'm spending too much time working.
There you go, man. Landecker never did that to you, though, did he? Did you get right up in his face? We need to play.
No.
Talking about like insider sources and all that and everything that's been going on with Chicago sports, the whole buzz about Justin Fields and where we're going to get with the first round draft pick and all blah blah. I mean, really, like everybody's got a source nowadays, and a lot of them, like last year when I was checking with all Chicago sports, most of those leads and most of those sources, was it different back in the day when you guys got source and information? Was it more credible?
Well, I'll tell you about the 85 Bears.
Oh,
You couldn't keep them off the air.
yeah.
I'm serious.
Very true. Very true.
The 85 Bears wanted to go on everything. They were on every radio station. They were on just about every TV station. They recorded that song, the Super Bowl Shuffle, before they even won the Super Bowl. They were as big off the field as far as personalities were concerned as they were on the field. McMahon had a restaurant in Lincoln Park. Gary Fensick had a place in Lincoln Park. Keith Van Horn, I introduced him to his future wife. I mean, come on.
That's pretty fantastic.
Oh, yeah. That. But I mean, really, they were like, you couldn't get away from them. They just wanted to be on.
Yeah.
Now I don't think it's like that.
I have a 85 Bears story that's actually in the book.
Please do.
And that is one day Kevin Matthews was on the air, and the 5 or 6 of the guys from the 85 Bears came into the station and duct taped him to his chair and duct taped his mouth and rolled him out into Michigan Avenue and just left him there and took over his show.
Oh, no.
It was like I think it was Tom Thayer and Kevin Butler and these guys were nuts. Steve McMichael.
And who's going to argue with them?
Yeah,
exactly. Crush you.
It's interesting that you guys are talking about all that because the 3 guys that you mentioned, Keith Van Horn and Mongo and Jimmy Mack, we've all had them here on a podcast. One thing that we did here at Bridges Scoreboard is we raised, I think it was just under, if I'm not mistaken, it was like $17,000 to help Mongo with his
nice.
fight against ALS.
So glad that they saw fit to put him in the Hall of Fame too.
Yeah. Yeah. It was cool. I was actually there that day when ESPN called, and Misty, she's my co-host. She was running back and forth. And she kept the phone. The one time that she walked away from her phone, I just so happened to be right there talking to the head of security of Chicago Bears. She ran to the restroom, and here calls Canton, Ohio's calling on the phone.
Oh, wow.
And I'm answering, and here comes Misty. She's pulling up her dress, and I'm like, what kind of show we doing here? And the guy, the president from the Hall of Fame, he's like, what was that? I'm like, nothing, it's an inside joke. But man, I tell you what, it was so cool working with all those guys. And like you said, lots of personality, so cool. They're all like amicable, wanting to get on, and they all have personality, man. It's awesome.
It's funny, when I went to work at CKG in like February of '87.
Wow.
Van Horn was doing like a weekend shift, and I at that point I hadn't met him, and we had a staff meeting a couple of weeks later, and I'm 6'3", and I'm standing next to this guy, and it's like he's like a building.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think he's an inch taller than me. He's
Keith-
like 6'7", right?
Keith, he's like 6'10".
Oh, really? He's like,
Yeah, and,
wow.
and I said, Keith, can you you're blocking the sun. It was like,
Wow.
what a good guy. Just a terrific guy.
Yeah. That's right. Fenzik. That's what it was. Gary Fenzik. You brought up Fenzik. Yeah. He was a pleasure to talk to. And Doug Plank too. Oh my gosh, man, those guys, unbelievable stories. Let's move on really quick. I've got, can each of you share your wildest radio story of all time with us?
Yeah.
Thank you. By the way, really quick, before I just want to pause really quick.
Yes.
We've got literally over 100 comments in the chat. This is like record-breaking comments. It's unbelievable.
Like, you suck. Get these people off. this
No,
podcast.
no, not at all.
So what was the question again? The most what?
Wildest story.
Yeah. Well, it is the wildest story. So you got to go back to the mid 70s, and I'm doing nights at WLS. John Travolta is on the television program Welcome Back, Kotter.
John Travolta. He just
Yes.
name dropped like it was nothing, folks.
Um, Well, this is going somewhere. So it's before Saturday Night Fever. It's before Grease. It's before whatever.
Wow.
He had an album out. He had a single out on RCA Records. And RCA Records brought John Travolta to town. And since WLS at the time was the big rock station, and I was the quote teen jock, and he was from Welcome Back, Kotter, he came on the air with me to do an interview. And then they decided that Travolta, with me tagging along, would make an appearance at the Woodfield Mall the
Whoa.
next day. And so we drove out to the Woodfield Mall, and we got into the security car for Woodfield Mall security. And we were expecting maybe, I don't know, 6,000 people. And we got in there, and it was like the Beatles had arrived. There were 30,000 plus people. The Woodfield Mall, it had these tiers going up from the center court. They were all packed. People were screaming. We couldn't
Wow.
even hear ourselves talk, right? And eventually 2 state police grabbed me and pulled me out by my armpits. Nothing bad happened. It was just an amazing experience. And I had a tape recorder with me, and I recorded this whole thing and came back and edited it and played it on the air a few times. And I've run into John Travolta over the years, and the last time being about 3 years ago.
Wow.
And he tells that story to anybody who's there.
That's awesome.
It's just one of the things that he said. It was the time that he knew something really big was about to happen. That's the wildest time, I think.
That is so
Yeah.
cool. So cool.
I can't quite match that in crowd size, but we were doing a broadcast from Great America, probably 87 or 88, and they had a new upside down. I think it was the first upside down roller coaster that they had.
Wow.
And what we were doing was taping stuff, and then we'd send it back and they'd play it. So they put a mic and a recorder on me, and my then girlfriend was with, and we rode this thing, and she's just shrieking like a banshee. And my producer back in the studio, when he got the tape, goes, "Dude, are you sure you guys weren't in a trailer somewhere having good sex?" Because she sounded like she had an orgasm about 5 times. It was like but we played the tape on the air anyway.
That was pretty juicy. I like that.
So when I was Steve and Gary's producer, one day Steve came in and said, "I'm going to get a vasectomy, and I want to do it live on the air."
Live on the air.
So we had to set up, we got a doctor to come and do it. And poor Gary Meyer had to sit on the other side while it was happening and describe what was going on.
Yeah.
Oh, and he was so hilarious that day that he was making Steve, laugh. And Steve's like, "You stop being funny. You're going to make the doctor make a big mistake." So yeah, I didn't have to see it, thank God, but I was running the controls for it.
Oh man,
that wasn't when the one of the guys that he had working for him died.
Oh yeah, Mark.
Wasn't that the same? Was that the same day?
That was a few years earlier.
Oh, okay. All right, but he was on the air live with something. They were doing something crazy that day.
Yeah, he didn't die on the air. He had is Roman still around? Yeah. He had his tonsils taken out.
Yeah.
Right, his tonsils were taken out, and so he was in and they were making fun of him for not getting this taken care of. When they called the hospital to check on him, they told him that he had died.
Jeez.
So it was. I mean, that was a pretty brutal moment.
Yeah.
I want to tell one more story.
Yeah,
It's not about me.
No.
Sort of. So Rick's my producer, and Rick is a gigantic Beatle fan. I mean, gigantic. You have no idea how big a Beatle fan Rick is.
How big
Is he? Well, we had an interview scheduled with what's the guy's name again? George Martin. George Martin, who's the Beatles producer, early producer. And we're going to have an interview on the air. And I go, "Hey, Rick, here, you do the interview." And it's like,
I think I might have pooped my pants. Yeah, that was. He said,
TMI.
I didn't, not really, but you know what I'm saying. He said, he's the Beatles producer. You're my producer. It should be a producer on producer.
Yeah.
And so he was on delay. Because he was calling us from London on a satellite. And the first question I asked him, I don't remember what the question was, but he didn't answer right away because of the delay. And I thought he was icing me. So I just started flop sweating. And he thought it was the funniest thing he had ever seen. He was convulsing in laughter it was live. It was live. But yeah, that's a good one.
Good one.
Folks, everybody, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to Chicago Sports Podcast while you're out there. And for all these awesome stories, we got 3 more, and then we're going to wrap it up. On a scale of 1 to 10, what is the current health condition of Chicago radio, guys?
Well, there's a great station if you like music, okay? And it's Me TV FM 87.7, and a dear friend of mine and somebody that Rick knows, and I think John knows him too. Phil Manicki is now programming the station. It's in the last month or so since he's really put his fingerprints on it. It's the most entertaining music endeavor that I've heard in a long time. A lot of mix from a lot of different eras and whatever else, but just absolutely delightful. So that, I think, is a positive. The rest of those people are pretty much on the dung heap.
Except, of course, for WGN.
Except for WGN, yeah.
Well, I think the state of Chicago radio is okay, quite frankly. I may not be acquainted with all the personalities that are on, but read that they are, and that they're doing bits and they're raising money and all of that kind of thing. That doesn't mean, though, that some other stations, which are part of conglomerates, are, well, they're bankrupt. I don't know how else to put it, because that's what they are. And even some of the personalities on those stations sound great. So I don't know. XRT has always been a great station. I will say this about WGNAM. It is one of the last of its kind in the United States. And by what I mean is that its approach is a quote unquote full service radio station. It's not intended to be politically left or right or anything else, but whatever is in the public interest, whether it's the weather, whether it's sports, whether it's some development and entertainment, some restaurant, some pizza, you name it, that'll be on the air. And there will be interviews with people who are involved in politics if it's applicable. And there used to be stations like that in a lot of major markets around the country, and there aren't anymore. We're also live, I believe, 24/7. We don't have any syndicated show as far as I know, although I know that we do broadcast, simulcast News Nation, which is this cable news network that's owned by the same company that we are. But we're the only radio station that this company owns. Nexstar Media, I don't know how many TV stations they own across the country, but it's gigantic. But we're the only radio station that this company owns. And you know what that means? I mean, all those things that I was talking about earlier about conglomeration and people, not there. It's like being in there is sort of like the way it used to be. I mean, it's just really a great pleasure to be there.
That's interesting too, because I just saw somebody post something 3-4 days ago about listenership of radio, and it still has there are more people listening to the radio, like in their cars or whatever else,
Oh yeah.
than there are people watching TV.
Oh yeah.
Which I thought was an interesting, for a medium that's really in decline in a lot of ways. People are still wanting to tune in, wanting to be entertained, wanting to be informed, wanting to, be educated. And in that sense, radio still has that magic.
Well, you're in a household with two working parties there, right? At least, if not more. And everybody's busy. How you doing? Keep it moving. And the fact remains is we want to be entertained when we leave our house, our gym, work, back home, whatever. I work at a steel mill. I work in Gary, Indiana, at U.S. Steel. And I got 2 doubles next week. As soon as my butt hits the seat, I'm turning on the radio. Okay. And then when I get in my work truck, I'm turning on the radio. Okay. When I leave, I'm turning on I love the freaking radio. So, and in between the day, I'm having a little text message with Jarrett Payton, and we're back and forth, what's going on, what's the latest buzz, whatever. And he was giving me updates because Misty was so busy. He was giving me updates about Mongo's health when he was recently in the hospital. I mean, it is like getting back to what you said about WGN. It is a close, feel community. I can't explain it. It's like a small town, even though it's larger than that. It just feels that way.
Exactly right.
Everybody feels like they're not too big for their britches. And I love that. I love the humble approach and just the closeness. You could just reach out and just talk to somebody like that. And it's really cool.
Well, there's a phrase that we used at the last place that I worked, live and local.
Live and local.
And that, you got actual live people, not syndicated or voice tracked, and you're also local. You're interested in your community and making people aware of things that are going on and whatever else. That's what radio's always done, and to a certain extent, it's gotten lost more than a few frequencies, but some like GN are definitely still doing that. That's great.
What advice do you give to kids who'd like to get into radio today? What would you like to tell them out there?
Don't.
I was going to say find a rich doctor and have children.
Well, that was a flippant remark, but I mean,
yeah.
I think it was Mitch said to me before we started all of this, he goes, "Aren't you glad you're not getting into radio today?" And I said, yeah, because I was in high school and went out to this little radio station in my hometown that was on the air locally and walked in, and they were on a dirt road across from a dairy farm. And I said, I want to be on the radio. You can't do that now. That road is unavailable. But I have to say that if it is something that a person really, really, really wants to do,
Yes, sir.
and they believe that in their heart of hearts that this is what they want to do,
Yep.
then go do it. Because one way or the other, it'll work out.
Yep.
Or you'll get it out of your system anyway. Yeah.
You'll find a path, but the desire and the dedication to do it really has to be there. It can't be some sort of hobby. It's got to be what you want. And I would suggest that you go to a university or a college that has some sort of communication arts department, or I majored in communication arts at Michigan State. There's a college up in Allendale, Michigan called Grand Valley State University that has a huge radio department, plus their own local station. I'm sure that those kinds of opportunities exist at other universities across the country. I just don't know about them. But I would suggest that you go to college, because the more you know, the more you will be able to reference once you get out. You know what I mean? It's like, you may not think about it at the time, but you may be on the air like 2 or 3 years later, and something comes up and you happen to know something about it because you took XYZ class. So the more that you know, the better that it is. And the more you desire it, the more you'll get it, pretty much.
You know what? Listening to you three fellows up here, it sounds like you all have like the craft like dialed in, like, getting there, being the first one in, the last one to leave, attention to detail, loving your craft. They say don't take work home, but you take it home anyways. You don't take work, home to work, but you take that anyways. Like, you guys just love what you do, and you just there, morning, noon, and night, and you just love it, and you embrace it, you embody it. You're all about it. And it's not like once you get to your spot, you're done. Because, it like you said, you were talking earlier about getting there on time. There's a saying when I was in the military, to be early is to be on time, and to be on time is to be late. And all that early is the preparation for what happens once you get there.
Well, it's not only that, but once you get a job, you have a responsibility.
Right.
You've got to put on some friggin' content.
You got to put on some content.
And that just doesn't drop out of the sky.
No.
That takes preparation.
Yeah.
And a lot of it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that was the way it was back in LS in the 70s. That's the way it is at GN.
Yeah.
I don't know else what to say about it. You have a responsibility not only to yourself,
Yeah,
and your reputation. You have a responsibility to the radio station and the other people that are on it that are also
depending on you,
trying to do the best that they can for you.
Right.
Well, the thing too, you go on the radio and it's your program. You're putting your signature on that. That's you signing that thing. Okay. That's John Landecker. It's Rick, the camper over here. But there's a cliche that I think really applies, and it doesn't necessarily just apply to radio. It's find something you love and pursue it, and you'll never work a day in your life. And I know for these guys and for myself, this was, a lifetime of doing stuff and whatever. And we worked hard at things, but it was a labor of love. Most definitely a labor of love, you know. Made it a lot easier and a lot more fun.
Fellas, once again, thank you so much for all of your content. I mean, it was just a pleasure. Everybody out there at YouTube Nation, out here, all these great, lovely people from Bridges Scoreboard, local community. So happy for you to be here. I mean, honestly, everybody in the chat, they're all saying the same thing. They could listen to your guys' stories for hours and days. So, but we got some book signing to do, so we're not going to spend hours and days. So, catch them on the flip side, and maybe we'll do something together down the road. But fellas, thank you for your time, and I appreciate you.
Thanks for having us.